Hey everyone, it's Kai, and I think this is a good time to talk about the overdress tier list for set 2. Things have been coming out for a while now, and Lyrical Monastery is going to come up, so we might as well just use the data we have and how good, our knowledge on the decks and kind of put them in their correct positions. Now, you might see here that I have 3 lines dedicated to the letter A, and you might be wondering, why there's so many A's, right? Why can't you just put different numbers? You could put S, you could put tier 1, you could put tier 1.5. And I just want to say, when people look at tier lists, they usually copy and paste the video or something, and they go, look at this tier list. Look at how these decks are all in different levels, right? So clearly this one is better than this one, and this one is absolute garbage because it's lower than this one, right? No, I just want to say everything that is in A is definitely very competitive, and if you were going to go to a tournament, you can take one of them and you wouldn't feel too bad, right? You wouldn't feel too bad. And then going down, you've got your B's, and B's are still all right, and then C's and D's, then maybe you've got issues. But anything with an A in it, it's pretty good. The only difference is, like, let's say you wrote an excellent essay at school, and the teacher gave you an A, and you're like, wow, I must have scored the best mark. But then your friend next to you got an A+, because he added one more word that was good, or he added a better comma, right? And then got an A+. So that is the only difference, right? They're both very strong. One deck might be just slightly better than the others, but they're still very, very good, very competitive, and the differences aren't as significant as you might think they are. So let's get started. What is in the top tier of the entire tier list? The A++, right? Maybe I should add another plus, right? Just to kind of annoy people. I mean, I was thinking of putting like tier 1, and then tier 1.5, and then tier 1.69 and things like that, but people get mad at numbers, right? People get mad at numbers more than letters. So I went with letters. So yeah, and I guess science. So at the top we have Bruce, right? I think Bruce sits here by itself because it's just kind of better than all the other decks, slightly in A, right? But it's a deck that requires a brain. Like, if you think about a deck like Bastion, which like you don't really need to go really deep with, but you can perform very, very well. Bruce, you do still kind of need to understand some of the combos associated with it and kind of plan ahead. But if you do get rewarded very, very well, because you get to dominate your opponent, you get to wreck them, you have a huge kill potential from like 2 or 3. When your opponent's at 2 or 3, and you make massive columns, just destroy them. So I think Bruce, just by that alone, doesn't really matter if you go first or second. If you go first, you probably just destroy them. If you're second, it's a bit, if you get something like a Bastion, sure, then it could be a bit iffy, could be a bit dangerous, but you still have a clear kill potential anyway. So Bruce by itself, I think this sits at like A++. It's just really strong. If you're going to a tournament, you probably do want to bring this deck. If you're going to a team tournament, you do want to take this with you. And that's why it is solely by itself at the top. The other one is Bastion. Bastion kind of sits in A+. And by the way, a lot of these these archetypes or these ride lines that are in each level, they're not ordered. They're not ordered. So everything is just as good as each other. But Bastion, I think we've seen a lot of results. The good thing about Bastion is that you don't have to be that smart in the format. You don't have to understand what like the rest of the format is to be able to perform well, right? It's very easy to play, very accessible, but at the same time, it's brutally strong. It just hits high numbers for no reason, hit multi-attacks for no reason. It has triple drive for no reason. So everything about it is very, very effective. The only thing that is bad is that you have a bunch of grade 3s in your hand that it's very hard to guard with, but who needs to guard when you can't guard anything anyway? If a Bruce is slamming your face for 53k, how do you even guard that? You don't. You just take it, right? You just take it or you perfect guard it. So it's pretty much Bastion. It's pretty much Bastion anyway. So Bastion going first definitely has a huge kill potential. You basically don't need to even update the deck at all because it's just that strong. You just need to add it in front sometimes and you're good to go, right? But even so, you have like the triple driver now, you have triple drive order, and you have 20k fronts. So overall the deck is slightly improved, but everything else has just gotten slightly better as well. So overall it's an A+. The other deck that is also in A+, I think, is Nirvana. Now, you might be going, why didn't you put Dragonic Overlord here? Because, Dragonic Overlord also has performed pretty well. But Nirvana has slowly crept up from the beginning of the fight being like, I thought Nirvana was good. No one's playing it. To now, people have actually figured out the deck. It has a higher ceiling than something like Overlord. Overlord is similar to Bastion in that it's very easy to pilot. The game plan is very, very simple. It's very easy to just perform with the deck. But Nirvana does let you do way more with the deck, but it does require you to have a slightly bigger brain, right? You do need to know how the deck works. You kind of need to know how the format is going to be played, what your matchups are. So you can't just go in and herb it up and then hope to just randomly win. Nirvana doesn't require you to plan ahead, just like Bruce, and plan your field out as well as know when to commit, when to not commit, and not just like immediately get wrecked, right? So Nirvana did take some time for it to rise and the deck to be developed more, but after it has done that, we've been seeing quite a few results where the conversion rate has been really good and just overall play is performing better. But of course, if you give a lower skilled player with a Nirvana deck, it's going to perform very poorly compared to something like a Bastion. So that's why Bastion, is still very high, very easy to play. You've got these higher, bigger brain decks like the Nirvanas, like the Bruce, that does require you to, understand the game more in order to perform well. But once you do, you're at the top. You're at the top. Going on to the A section, we have something like Seraph Snow. Right? Seraph Snow, one of the kind of like the best 3-attacker deck right now. When you look at all the other decks currently at the top, they are multi-attack decks. Seraph Snow is a very just triple attacks at its best. Of course, it does get triple drive. Its columns can hit okay. It's got the unique prism mechanic that can kind of tax your opponent, and at the same time, that prism mechanic has been really buffed by set 2, so it basically always goes off. The biggest weakness of Seraph Snow in set 1 was that, your opponent can play around the prism. Now they basically cannot. You basically get prism all the time, and it's got a lot of nice offensive and defensive tricks that work well in its favor. So overall, Seraph Snow, one of the just the best 3-attacker deck right now, I think, and does pretty well against like a huge majority of the matchups. And it does kind of okay against the top decks. In team tournaments, when you look at what you want to bring, you have like, the Bastions, the Bruce, and then you got to pick the third deck, which is usually something like a Nirvana or a Brandgate deck, which is Seraph Snow, right? So Seraph Snow still retains its popularity. Not exactly a super difficult deck to play as well. It just pretty much performs well, but it's still got the threatening triple drive. Also, the over trigger in this deck is just, in Brandgate, is just the best, one of the best versus like everything else. So overall, it's got a lot of kill potential, but it can play a bit of the long game as well as, if your opponent is not that smart, doesn't really know how to play around your things, you can kind of just steamroll them and make them feel bad. So Seraph Snow, top deck, it's in the A section. I think it's really, really good. The other deck that is also in the A section is Draconic Overlord. Again, this is like a Bastion, except with a red color, right? Where, you don't really need to know the format too much. The deck literally just builds itself. And also it just does 4 attacks, 2 Vanguard swings, pretty deadly. Your opponent can't guard the Regard, Vanguard to Regard swing very well. But yeah, just like 3 triggers in a turn, cycle to the deck. Easy deck to play, easy deck to perform with. But I kind of put it lower than Nirvana because once, the Dragon Empire players figured out, the Nirvana build. Nirvana is just like a slightly better Draconic Overlord deck, and if you're confident with playing the game, I think you'd probably just want to take Nirvana over Draconic Overlord, unless you do know, you just love your Draconic Overlord, or you just want to bring this kind of deck to the format. The ceiling on it is lower than Nirvana, which is another reason why I put it lower, but just it's very consistent as well. So less things that can go wrong. But just the ceiling is lower too. So all these 5 decks comprise just the top competitive decks in the current format. And of course, I do think Bruce is better than the Bastion and Nirvana tier, and then this one is slightly better than the A tier. We've kind of seen, like ever since Nirvana's rise, we've seen less of Overlord, and then overall we've started seeing less of the Seraph Snow decks. Though we still see it a bit. But yeah, that's kind of where it's kind of been. These decks still been seeing quite a lot. These bottom 2 been seeing slightly less, especially the Overlords, because the Nirvanas have been taking the position. Now, moving on to tier B, we have Orphist. Now, Orphist is currently kind of being overshadowed by Seraph Snow, just because Seraph Snow is just really a really good deck, very accessible, very strong. Orphist is also a 3-attacker deck. One thing I don't like about Orphist is that it's still, everyone else got buffed. Orphist got some good goodies. It feels like it's still missing that like one really nice oomph turn that will just push it over the edge. Overall, I think a lot of the 3-attacker decks have suffered because why bring a 3 attacker deck in overdress when you can bring a 4 attacker deck or a 5 attacker deck, especially when those 5 attacker decks also hit pretty big, right? So overall, the multi-attack decks have definitely taken over the formats, as well as Seraph Snow being just, you know, kind of like a half control, half 3 attacker deck that can also hit okay lines. Orpheus kind of emphasizes the power lines, but sacrifices kind of the control part. Of course, you have decks that are running Escalate, or, you know, running the World engine that tries to get more plays more retire orders. But those aren't as powerful as, you know, this prison control that is just like, you know, taking your opponent's cards as well as buffing your own power and things like that. So I think Orpheus is slightly lower than Seraph Snow, sitting in the B section. Of course, people will still do well with it again. I think anything that is A+, A or high is like a good pick. B or higher does have like a bit less, you know, outplay, but I guess, you know, you're still competitive. You still can't let your guard down. And I think one thing with Orpheus is that, you know, the West recently got set 2, and we've been seeing a lot of Orpheus players as well kind of develop the deck and, you know, showing results with it. So this is kind of like, this is one of the few decks that I'm going to say that is ordered correctly. It is at the top of B, right? And we're just seeing what kind of results it can show. Another deck that I think is pretty strong right now is still Magnolia. Magnolia, of course, does have a bad matchup right now against a lot of these decks, but because it got buffed as well, in terms of not always relying on the Persona Ride, it does have more options that it can do. It's still pretty good. It's multi-attacking, you know, it can still high roll really hard. But let's say you face a Bruce, you kind of feel bad. You face a Seraph Snow, kind of get controlled, right? But then you have things like when you face like a Bastion, you're still in good shape, right? Bastion hasn't changed. You've gotten buffer, so you've got a good matchup there. And then against the other like Dragon Empire decks, you're kind of like even, right? You're kind of even. You're good, not good. Yeah, it's all right. So you got like 2 bad matchups, 1 really good matchup, and then 2 overall okay matchups. Then against the rest of the other decks, then you kind of like I think against the other decks, you're kind of fine, right? You're kind of fine. So yeah, just because of your 2 bad matchups are kind of high on the ladder, this is kind of falling down. But you know, it's one of the biggest high roll decks in the entire format. Can do lots of multi attack and can hit big. You can start hitting big as well. So overall, I do think it's it's decent for where it is. Sometimes Magnolia has written higher, but you know, right now I think it's at its correct place in B. Right, it's at its correct place. The next deck that I think is good is Zolga. Zolga is basically a Bruce that doesn't multi-attack. Right? The power lines hit really high, but it just only attacks 3 times. That's a huge sag, right? It's huge sag times. If it even swung for like the 4th time, then I'd be like, wow, this deck is like pretty good and go up. But because it only swings 3 times of high power lanes, and sure, depending on your build, you can play something like Nectar that gives crit. You know, you've got Shark that can kind of force out, you know, double nulls when your opponent has like low cards and things like that. But apart from that, the only thing that's holding this deck back is 3 attacking, right? 3 attacking, very mappable. Like the biggest problem with, you know, high power 3 attack decks is that every attack is mappable. It's easy for your opponent to think how your turn will go out and how to guard. So that is and where your ceilings lie, right? How powerful your lines are going to be. So overall, although you can hit high, if they're only hitting like 1 damage, it's not very good. If something gets a crit, sure, they can guard that, but it's not exactly too difficult versus, you know, just anything else, right? Anything else, pretty much. So Zolga kind of sits in B, and then the last deck in B, I think, is like Hexahedron. Hexahedron got pretty good support. It's definitely a big step up from before, because before it was just kind of like meh. Now it has slightly more identity. There's more ways to kind of fish out its triggers, and it's kind of being more OTT-like versus more Paladin-like, which is pretty nice. And I think it's got okay tools. It just kind of needs a bit more push versus everything else. Everything else is like way more, like either like more consistent, or just high power, or just you know, more attacks. Hexahedron is basically like a 3 attack deck unless you're running Lepisto, but you know, the Lepisto and all the different combos that you need to kind of pop it off, right? Because you know, your Lepisto is a 2 CB, and you want to have like the counter charge and things like that. All the different pieces kind of put a bit down. Its consistency is a bit lower. That's why it is in B, right? And I think if I wanted to really like hard this, I think these 2 are in high B and these 2 are in low B, but I kind of don't want to move them any lower because then it's kind of be like, You know, this is clearly a worse deck, but these are kind of like B pluses, and this is like B minus, right? These are B minuses, right? Moving on to C, this is where you know, things really need work. We have Barrow Magnus, right? Barrow Magnus really didn't get much support at all, and right now it's still just as plain and glass cannony as its first set iteration. It's still very, very, you know, you can still high roll, but everything else got better, right? Everything else got stronger, more quicker, more faster. Barrow Magnus is still in the same place. It's got a new grade 2. It's like, it's all right. It's all right. It's got a new order. It's all right. It's okay. But apart from that, you know, Barrow Magnus hasn't really gotten much, so that's why it's really suffering in team tournaments as well, right? You're never gonna take a Barrow Magnus over Bruce. Right? That's just it. It's just like Barrow Bruce, give me the Bruce, right? Barrow, yeah, it's not in a great place at the moment. Basically because everything else just got better, and this one didn't, right? It's kind of like Bastion. Like Bastion got a few pieces, but Bastion was already like super good and super powerful, while Barrow was like, it was decent, but now because it just has even less defense, it just feels bad, right? So Barrow kind of dropped down pretty heavily. Eugene, on the other hand, rose up pretty quickly. It went from the lowest deck to the second lowest deck, so it I guess, does it count as like a 100% improvement? It went up one slot. It went one slot from the worst deck to the second worst deck. And now it's kind of in the same tier as Barrow, right? Like, they're kind of both decks, like, I guess more people have fun playing Eugene, because it has that meme factor, while Barrow, kind of everyone just dropped off that train very, very quickly. Both decks, of course, are very cheap, so that's what that is going for it. But overall, like, you know, you see a lot of like funny builds of Eugene, but overall it's just like it's definitely lower than everything in this tier. It's around the same as Barrow, I think, maybe slightly lower, but you know, overall Eugene kind of rose a bit just because it's got at least some decent support. It wasn't relying on like 0.5 like 50% support basically, right? So it actually had some support, so it's actually set 1.5. it's at set 1.5. Well, maybe it's got enough support, but it's still not as good as the other decks. And finally, in like tier D, colon, so it looks like a frown in case you didn't know that, we have Phantom Blaster Dragon, which is bad. It's just really bad. All right, it just doesn't do anything, right? It just doesn't do anything. I don't know what to say about this, right? The ride line is like, it's average, it's okay. The card itself is like, why couldn't they have just they could have just totally reprinted the V Phantom Blaster Dragon and then changed its force marker to the Persona Ride icon, and I think it would be infinitely better and much more competitive and just a good, like, actually playable, right? Actually playable. Right now, the payoff for this card is absolutely non-existent, and you know, you don't want to use. It's basically just, it has one effect, right? It gets a blaster from the soul. That's the effect. Second effect is like, I could damage deny my opponent, but who actually cares? It doesn't do anything. I could retire 2 of my opponent's cards by sacrificing 3. Although if I have that one piece, I only have to sacrifice 2. So it's not consistent there. You know, it's relying on another card to make your cost actually valuable, and then the payoff for it is not very good. It's just really, really bad, right? It's just, I don't know what to say. It hits like a wet noodle. It doesn't do anything. It gets a crit, but who cares, right? So I think they definitely nerfed this way too much, and it's basically suffering, right? If you wanted to play a Keta Sanctuary deck, you could build any other deck and you'd have a way better time. So you might as well just do that. So overall, yeah, that is the tier list. Everything at the top is playable. You have like 5 really good decks. 5 really good decks. They are nearly from every single nation, right? You're just missing. Only Stoichea is missing out, so that's too bad. But you know, you're probably gonna get something good later on. Flagberg Dragon's pretty good. Just saying. Yeah. You've got 5 good decks at the top. You've got this tier 2, actual tier 2 at tier B. With these decks that are kind of not as top as the top 5 decks, but still very decent, still very, very competitive. With a bit of luck, you'll probably win a tournament with this. And then you've got the last 3 decks that, you know, with C you're gonna need a lot of luck, I think. And then in D you're just gonna go home, right? Just gonna quickly go home. And that's kind of it, right? So overall, in terms of the format, is it in a good position? I think people say that Leonard is definitely very, very strong in the format. I am kind of agreeing, of course. I do think we do need to see a bit more innovations. I feel like, you know, once a lot of the players in the West play more Bruce and show more results if they can, of course, because you know we got something that is also a D that is out in the world at the moment, and that is starts with D, ends with Elta, so Delta, right? Because of that, we might not see as many results from the West, but I feel like the Western players will definitely probably just break Bruce really hard, and if we see more results for this, we might just put Bruce at like, you know, A++++, or like tier S. Let's just move it up to tier S, right? Just be like in a tier by itself. So far on the Japanese side, we haven't seen that case. Of course, you know, these, again, like I said before, like the Bastions, the Nirvanas, they can still high roll. They can still go, like, if they go first with a good player, or they just, few crits, they can definitely just randomly win still. And the potential for them to like just randomly destroy people is still high. So, but I don't know. I think we need more results to see where Bruce does. Normally, I don't really go with just results based tier list, right? I have to add my opinion. But so far from my testing, I think Bruce is still very strong, very strong. But, you know, everyone else has just been showing that, you know, everything else is also very strong. So it's kind of just like weird. It's just so weird. Well, I think we need to see more results just from the Western side, just to kind of before I start putting Bruce into the next level, right? So that's it. That is the tier list from me. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Did I do it right? Of course, it's a tier list video, so everyone's gonna chuck the I don't know, chuck the I don't want to swear, right? Just chuck their opinions around, and I'm happy to hear it. Right? Let me know what your opinions are, if you agree with this or not. And if you don't agree, then yeah, bad luck. Like and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video.